Good evening, everyone. Before I say a word of this lecture, I would like to invite Associate Professor of Opera and Music Director of Eastman Opera Theater, Timothy Long, to say a few words about the land that we are standing on this evening. Let's welcome Timothy.
Thank you all, Tongo and Halito, and thank you for coming today. We respectfully acknowledge that the Eastman School of Music and the University of Rochester are located on the traditional lands of the Seneca Nation, known as the Great Hill People and keepers of the western door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We recognize the long-standing presence of the indigenous peoples who have lived and continue to live on this land, which precedes the establishment of this university, New York State, and the United States of America. In so doing, we honor the Haudenosaunee people, their elders, and all of their ancestors who continue to guide them today. Mado, and thank you for being here.
How can one forget these horrible pages registered with blood in the book of life? How can one forget the deadly scenes that have been etched with unbound pain and engraved deep in the soul? How can one forget our storm-stricken childhood that undulated in the sea of blood that gushed from the open wounds of our own race? These words inspire our gathering this evening. In 1908, a choice was made. The Young Turks rose to power with an ultra-nationalist mission. In 1915, another choice was made. The Turkish officials would carry out a mass movement and genocide of the Armenian people living in the dismantled Ottoman Empire. In the 1920s, these choices became missions and were carried out with the highest intensity and without mercy. Tonight, you made a choice. You could be doing other things right now, but you have made a choice to be here, to listen, to ponder, to lament, to learn. Because of a collective choice, we will hopefully leave here more human than when we first entered, and together create a new Armenia. All because of a child without spring. That child is my great-grandmother, Haiarbi Torian, also known as Alice or Elise. The untold story we will hear of tonight is a horrific one. I am issuing a warning at this time that if you need to leave at any moment or close your eyes, please feel free to do so. The material is dark, and I am committed to telling this story unapologetically. Although this event is a lecture recital, I hope to learn as well as we uncover these untold stories of the past while remembering the power of the human voice, even the voices that are sometimes unheard during their lifetimes. I now ask for your open-mindedness and for your patient kindness as not my audience, but my team. May we grow together. Armenia is the landlocked country located in the highlands of Western Asia, in the Caucasus region, bordered by Turkey to the west, Georgia to the north, and Azerbaijan to the east, and Iran and Azerbaijan to the south. Yerevan is the capital and the largest city. These historical maps demonstrate the complexity of the region through time. Because of how difficult geographical accuracy can be for family histories that find their roots in genocide, many of the Armenian artists and scholars I have met choose to use the term Swana for the region. It is, quote, a decolonial word to replace terms like Middle Eastern, Near Eastern, Arab world, or Islamic world that have colonial, Eurocentric, and Orientalist origins, and are created to conflate, contain, or dehumanize the people living there. If we are discussing genocide, then we must define genocide. I had an English teacher in high school named Mr. Kevin Starr, who who consistently reminded his students that euphemisms can be well-intended but detrimental and unclear. This applies to the Armenian genocide. There are published sources that use euphemisms instead of the term Armenian genocide. Such are a messy piece of a messy war, destruction, segregation, or the Turkish-Armenian conflict, like my textbook in high school. In 1943, genocide was invented by the Polish Jewish lawyer Raffi to describe the actions of Nazi Germany toward the Jews. The Greek prefix genos, meaning race or tribe, and the Latin suffix, meaning side, killing. Only 8 years after the invention of the word, the UN established the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Article 2 is displayed. If there are euphemisms, why is it so crucial that we use this word to describe what happened to 20th century Armenians? The Republic of Turkey denies a genocide. Worse, an academic war has been waged to cancel those who pursue raising awareness of this event as genocide. In his 2005 novel, The Great Game of Genocide, Donald Bloxham says, "The genocide and accompanying expropriations were intrinsic to the development of the Turkish Republic in the form in which it appeared in 1924. Henry Morgenthau Sr., American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire during World War I, stated, "When the Turkish authorities gave the orders for these deportations, they were merely giving the death warrant to a whole race. They understood this well, and in their conversations with me, they made no particular attempt to conceal this fact." When we trade genocide for diluted euphemisms, we erase murderous intentions, and we condone the killings of my people. One example of this scholarly war is the Lifton envelope, where an author acknowledged the massacres as the Armenian genocide and was attacked by other US scholars who were at that time endowed by the Republic of Turkey. We do not have time to discuss this tonight, but you can visit the blog portion of my website to read about this in detail. Before World War I, there were roughly 2 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. By 1922, there were fewer than 400,000. This means roughly 1.5 million Armenians were murdered by the early 1920s. From 1908 through 1923, they were driven from their homes, marched across blazing hot deserts, crucified on crosses, and used as pack animals in an attempt to annihilate the Armenian race. Alice, my great-grandmother, tells this part of history as such, quote, "At the time, for reasons unknown to Armenians, Turkish gendarmes conducted massive arrests in Istanbul and the Turkish provinces. Armenians from all walks of life, whether living within the boundaries of Istanbul or the provinces, were taken in groups to unknown places and killed after being subjected to a variety of torments." Who could do such a thing? The ruling figures and architects of the genocide were 3 men: Grand Vizier Mehmed Talat Pasha, Minister of War Ismail Enver Pasha, and Minister of the Navy Ahmad Jamal Pasha. All 3 met violent deaths after the war. Talat and Jamal were assassinated, while Enver died leading a revolt near present-day Tajikistan. Since their deaths, Talat and Enver's remains have been reburied at the Monument of Liberty in Istanbul, and some of Turkey's streets have been renamed in their honor. The 5 songs that I've composed to share with you today are 5 moments from this abbreviated timeline, but through the direct words and eyes of my great-grandmother, Haiarbi. During my undergraduate studies while working on this project, I focused much time on understanding the denial of the genocide, because the US refused to acknowledge the massacre of the Armenians for over 100 years. During my research, it became apparent that 1, unethical scholars argue that there is no evidence to prove the killings of Armenians were planned or premeditated. 2, the fear in acknowledging the events of the early 20th century as genocide is founded in our need for oil. 3, numerous times US leaders tried to acknowledge the event as genocide, and numerous times these leaders failed because of internal pressures. In his book on the history of the modern Middle East, a somewhat neutral scholar, Cleveland, states, any episode in which as many 1 million civilians may have lost their lives is an appalling one. So what are we doing here tonight? What is the danger of denial? If we are not actively denouncing, then the darkest parts of history become our reality. In November 2020, the UEFA announced it banned for life a staff member of the Azerbaijani football club, Nurlan Ibrahimov, for his social media post regarding the Nagorno-Karabakh war, in which he stated, "We must kill all Armenians, women, children, the elderly. We need to kill them without distinctions, no regrets." 2020. When Terence Dupre wrote to the newly formed United States Holocaust Memorial Council with regard to Ali Wiesel, he stated this, referring to an advertisement he had seen, is one more effort in the general will to deny all genocides. And in the Armenian case, of course, there are no longer any survivors or liberators around to testify and bear witness. I don't know what we should do, nor even what we can do. Well, my beloved community, we're here tonight. If the world still wishes to kill, then what's the hope? Deny the denial. As I was writing a third-year report on the prolonged denial of genocide in this degree program, the New York Times published on April 21st that President Biden would be expected to acknowledge the genocide, and by April 24th, 2021, Armenians across the world heard this, quote, "We remember the lives of all those who died in the Ottoman-era Armenian genocide and recommit ourselves to preventing such an atrocity from ever again occurring. And we remember so that we remain ever vigilant against the corrosive influence of hate in all its form." This was a pivotal moment of my research. I no longer had to try to convince people of the reasons why we should declare these killings as genocide. The focus now shifted to telling my great-grandmother's stories so that we continue to keep her words alive and many brave people like her who went before us. So I ask you this evening, does history repeat itself, or are we the same people making the same choices? Where are we now? Who are the scapegoats? Look at the world around you. Tonight, in the words of the foreign minister, is not about Armenia and Turkey. This is about our obligation to recognize and condemn the past, present, and future genocide. Because of Armin T. Wegner, we have moments of this genocide caught on camera. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum says this: "As a second lieutenant in the German army stationed in the Ottoman Empire in April 1915, Wegner took the initiative to investigate reports of Armenian massacres. Disobeying orders intended to stifle news of the massacres, he collected information on the genocide and took hundreds of photographs of Armenian deportation camps, primarily in the Syrian desert. Wegner was eventually arrested, but not before he had succeeded in channeling a portion of his research material to Germany and the United States through secret mail routes. When he was transferred to Constantinople in November 1916, he secretly took with him photographic plates of images he and other German officers recorded. All photographs that we're going to see today are those I scanned during my visit to the Chappelle Center at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, made possible with funding from the Institute for Music Leadership and the kindness of librarian Vincent, who helped me at the archives and who is watching this evening via live stream. I've decided that we will view some of these disturbing images, but we will look at them in silence out of reverence for the human beings in the photographs. There is a video of Wegner speaking about this on my blog, if you are interested. We are now going to begin recalling the horrors of the genocide through the eyes of my great-grandmother, Haiarbi, who we also know as Alice or Elise. For her, this was a torturous and tormenting task. Let us put ourselves in the mindset of what it was like for Alice to recall her past. From chapter 1 of her memoir, I search the mazy corners of my memory and surf the waves of the unbound ocean of my thoughts in search of a happy hour, a pleasant moment, a memorable minute in the memories of my childhood. Criminal actions, terrifying episodes, horrible tragedies, coagulated and thick massacres shake my being. Memories that have not yet discolored, nor will ever discolor. We will now look at the photos in silence. Some of the first tormenting memories Alice remembers in her memoir involve her father, Professor Hovhannes Nazarian, my great-great-grandfather. He was deemed an internal threat because he was an Armenian intellectual. Born in Sapastia in 1872, Nazarian attended the Holy Translator School as an orphan and then studied at the seminary of Armash. In 1896, he moved to Switzerland where he studied philosophy and pedagogy in Geneva. As one of his final academic achievements in 1901, he graduated top of his class from the Sorbonne. He would go on to publish several books, including Land of Happiness, Educational Renaissance, The Invasion of Connoisseur, and Dawn. In an article by Hunchag intellectual Miriam Safarian, Nazarian's bravery and hardship is remembered as such. To avoid the further persecutions, Nazarian acted as principal successively in many different provinces. Like many of his revolutionary and intellectual friends, he spent many months hiding in dark basements, particularly since he had previously been accused, imprisoned, and sentenced to death as a revolutionary activist and intellectual. On June 20th of 1915, the American embassy reported the news that Ottoman Turkey was pursuing a policy of mass killings, what we would most likely refer to today as genocide, against the Armenians. Quote, if a means is not found to aid them through the next few months until they get established in their new surroundings, 2/3 or 3/4 of them will die of starvation and disease. Alice remembers this point in time with these words. Our family lived in Istanbul at the time. My father, along with other Hunchag leaders, was a fugitive sought by the Ottoman government under the names Nazarian and Basmajian. He was sentenced to death as a well-known intellectual and national activist. He remained cloistered at home for months and months, his heart and soul surrounded by dark thoughts. He sat self-contained in a corner of the room, often dressed in pajamas with a small hat on his head. He read local newspapers, perhaps to gather information on the daily situation. Every time the arrests intensified and the Turkish gendarmes began searching Armenian houses, my father would lock himself in a small closet, holed in the wall of our modest apartment for days at a time. A thick mattress fit in the barely 1 meter square hole in the wall. To hide my father's shelter, my mother would close the closet door and cover it with a large picture of a meadow. Even though my great-great-grandfather's life was atrociously heavy, he was still one of the more blessed individuals because he lived. Alice says in chapter 2, it was in this way that we spent sleepless and stressful nights, every day, every hour, and every minute. We lived with these fears that shook our beings at its roots. Who knew whose house would be invaded tomorrow? Whose life would come to an end? Who would be exiled? And who would be killed? One morning, Alice's sister got into an altercation with a Turkish officer. She ran home and told the story to her family. The following day, Alice's father woke at dusk and took her sister away to an unknown place and never brought her back. In February of 1915, Talat Pasha told German ambassadors it was time to conclude the Armenian question once and for all. The ruling Ottoman Central Committee discussed plans to eliminate the Armenian people in their entirety. Just days later, after Alice's sister was taken away, a little after 3 a.m., the police invaded her home and arrested her father and 15-year-old brother, who were exiled to an unknown place. Within 2 months, all male Armenians aged 15 and above were rounded up with an unknown fate. Only few left in time for Smyrna and other countries. Alice was left unprotected and forsaken with her mother and 4 other siblings. Alice's mother devised a plan to move to Smyrna, following in the footsteps of Armenian and Greek refugees who went before them, who escaped from Turkish provinces and Afyonkarahisar. In order to survive and sustain her youngest child, Alice's mother wrote letters of entreaty and made appeals to have her children placed in orphanages. It became a day-to-day uncertainty as to whether Alice would have her mother by her side. Her mother and younger sister found refuge in a camp designated for Armenian widows on Almazian Street. At the Chappelle Center, I devoted some of the time I had to reading a January 28, 1916 interview transcript with Enver Pasha on universal military training. To my naive surprise, Pasha, one of the architects of the genocide, mentioned nothing of his orders to conclude the Armenian question once and for all. Denial of the Armenian genocide was manifested while the genocide was happening. How scary is it, my community, that we can look genocide in the face, we can reach out and touch it, and still deny that it's happening. It's as easy as saying, "This too shall pass." After hearing of her husband's friends being slaughtered, Alice's mother, quote, came to terms with our neighbor Dejar Emi, who owned a cart and who was willing to take us safely to Smyrna in return for our 2 valuable rugs. That week, my mother first buried my father's unpublished works in one of our basement rooms, fearing that the police might search us during the trip and kill us because of the manuscripts. Even with her father taken, the writings he left behind, his life's work, still was hated and posed as a threat to his wife and children. For some resemblance of security, his wife buried her husband's life's work, but they could not and would not bury their Armenian identity. On July 7, 1915, reportings from the American Embassy regarding the deportation of Armenians from Tsaitun and the treatment of Armenian children in Trebizond stated, Dr. and Mrs. Crawford received about 300 into their school from parents who were being sent away. This was all contrary to the proclamation on which had been posted by the government. Very disquieting reports concerning the treatment of these people who have been sent away. If one half turn out to be true, it will be shocking. We know the reports are true. A true hero, Alice's mother endured this suffering for her children. Even in horror, Alice's mother thought beyond herself and for the generations of Armenians to come. In a heartbreaking narrative, Alice remembers this time of her life as such. Therefore, at night, when we gathered around my mother to sleep, she drilled us to remember the names of our parents, relatives, and birthplaces, and our exact ages. Then she added, if I stay here and die, you will go to different countries in the future, grow up, and perhaps become people of positions. Always remember that I have buried your father's unpublished writings in a can under the wall of room 1 of the refugee camp on Smyrna's Almazian Street. The survivor amongst you should come after them. My mother was in a delicate situation. Her 4 children were about to be taken away to unknown places. Who knew what kind of hardship would await them in these new places? She would stay here with a child in her lap, a captive of the paws of death and slavery. Having made peace with all of this, our freedom was my mother's only concern. I would now like to invite my mother, Rhonda Wright, to share a few words with us that I find powerful and would like you all to experience.
Yes, Tata, I am listening. Yes, Tata, I hear you. Yes, Tata, I promise I will never forget. I am Rhonda Wright. Haiarbi Nazarian was my grandmother. She was my mom's mom. My mother was Armenian and my father was Lebanese. In my grandmother's eyes, I was Armenian. Rarely a mention of the Lebanese in me. You are of noble people, Rhonda. You must never forget. Promise me you are hearing my words. Promise me you will never forget your people, our people. There was not a time we were together where she did not remind me of this. Remind me I was an Armenian. Remind me of my people. Remind me of my heritage. Remind me of the pain they suffered. Remind me their cries were ignored. Remind me it was my duty to share her story. I could never tell if she was sharing this with me to never forget or stating it over and over as a tribute to so many that she loved and lost. She would save her grocery money and have me write a check every few months to the Armenian refugees. She would send money to support Armenian authors to encourage them. Tata, you have no money, I would tell her. She would abruptly close my hand with her cash and say, no, they need it more than we do. I wrote the checks. I took it seriously, for her pain and memories were real, lived out daily, and no laughing matter. She wore them on her face. It was part of her demeanor. She carried it with her and was part of her every breath, ingrained in her. One time my mom had a friend for dinner, and this gentleman made a joke to my grandmother when she put his food in front of him. He said, laughing, "Did I ever tell you I was a Turk?" The kitchen became silent. I have never seen a plate taken from someone so quickly. I don't know whose eyes were bigger, his or mine. Seeing the offense of his words and feeling the air thicken in the room, he quickly apologized. She turned to him with such a serious face and said, "You must never joke about such things. Many were tortured and slaughtered, and there is no room for laughter with this tragedy." My Tata's pain was deep. In all my years with her, I can only recall her laughing once. Her life was lived in mourning of her people. She was serious, tough, proud, and strong. She never showed any sign of weakness. Could she have laid down her pain? Yes. I believe she feared if she let it go, it would dishonor the unheard voices of her people. The pain was forever etched in her mind. She would write for hours. Maybe part of her coping was her writing. She would write daily in her journals. She would trace her words with her pen over and over, perhaps to make sure it could not be erased, perhaps to repeat the thoughts in her head, or maybe just to calm her spirit. Which of these I do not know, but I do believe it was her way of coping, because I never saw comfort or rest in her with this. Was it because she could not ever let go of what she saw, or that she would not allow herself to do so? She always wanted her story told. My cousin Mona Ganam worked so hard to have some of Tata's work translated. Because of this, the grants given to Raffi and the incredible help and support from the staff here at Eastman, we get to share her story tonight. Tata would have been so pleased. At the end of her life, I thanked her for all that she taught me. I told her God sees everything and she could be free. I told her no evil goes unseen. I told her no trial is wasted. God loved her and hears her cries and those of her people. She fought me many times on this, but near the end of her life, she received it. I believe she was set free. Through all this, I vowed to teach our children to love and not hate. Stand up for those who are being picked on and be the change they want to see. Philippians 2:4, look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. No evil is unseen, no trial is wasted. Yes, Tata, I am listening. Yes, Tata, I hear you. Yes, Tata, we promise we will never forget.
She say, my father was a scholar. Yes, my father was a scholar. My mother was a teacher. And I can do, yes, my mother was my father was my mother was a teacher, and I can do great things too. Yes, is she gone? Was that the last time I will see her? Where will she go? What will they do to her? I just want to know, is she gone? What did she say? No, I can do great things too. I will do great things too. From April of 1915 to May of 1918, a deliberate ethnic cleansing of Armenians was launched on a vast scale, with murders, looting, burning of villages, rapes, and deportations. Western observers estimate more than 1 million are dead at this campaign's end. Alice remembers the following about where she was and who she was with during these years. Soon, the Kemalist forces arrived in Smyrna, and the horrors of a fierce massacre unfolded. We spent 15 days locked behind the closed windows and doors of the orphanage, disconnected from external news and immersed in fear. Day and night, the explosions of cannons, guns, and machine guns roared like distant storm clouds. As the heart-rending screams reached us, we shrank and cried, not fully comprehending the capacity of the cruelty. For about a month, the Kurd and Turkish populations of Armenia have been massacring Armenians with the assistance of Ottoman authorities. In view of those new crimes of Turkey against humanity and civilization, the Allied governments announced publicly to the Sublime Porte that they will hold personally responsible these crimes, all members of the Ottoman government and those of their agents who are implicated in such massacres. A couple of months go by. Deportation of and excesses against peaceful Armenians is increasing, and from harrowing reports of eyewitnesses, it appears that a campaign of race extermination is in progress under a pretext of reprisal against rebellion. Protests as well as threats are unavailing and probably incite the Ottoman government to more drastic measures, as they are determined to disclaim responsibility for their absolute disregard of capitulations, and I believe nothing short of actual force, which obviously the United States are not in a position to exert, would adequately meet the situation. Alice had a first-hand account of race extermination. Many energetic children and beautiful girls were burned in bakeries. Many young brides and lively brave men were killed, and they had been pulled from their homes. After being snatched from the laps of their parents, many beautiful women were abducted, and many virgins were raped. The Turks brought many young men to the woods across from our house. They tied one of their legs and arms to the branches of one tree, and the other leg and arm to the branches of another tree, and then they cut the ropes, and that joined the branches. When the bodies of those brave men were severed from the forceful separation of the trees, the bestial men laughed loudly over the painful death of human beings, quenching their monstrous passions. As an innocent child, Alice saw the worst imaginable. Turks had hanged 20 Armenians that morning from the gallows, and many of them delivered speeches on the gallows before their deaths. One of them had said, "We, the 20, will die, but 20,000 will follow to avenge us." Another sang a love song that made the audience cry. A third poured curses on the heads of the Turkish executioners. At the time, I did not understand much of what was being said, but as years passed, every time people recalled the final words of those 20 brave men, I rejoiced in my young heart. As an Armenian, I felt a kind of pride. 20 will die. We, the 20, will die. But 20,000 will follow to avenge us. Will follow to avenge us. Through Professor Nazarian's obituaries, we are able to see what this moment in time was like for the partially reunited Nazarian family after the racial extermination. In 1922, he was released thanks to the mediations of a bishop and other community leaders. He worked for a short period at the Armenian Prelacy of Karpar and in an establishment run by the Near East Relief Foundation. Thereafter, he moved to Aleppo, where he accepted the general directorship of the orphanage for the academic year. The following year, he was invited to act as a principal of the Armenian School of Damascus. Unfortunately, he died in Aleppo on October 24th, 1924, after a sudden ailment, leaving behind children and a widow, Mrs. Zvart Nazarian, who had been educating Armenian children and helping her husband as a teacher and kindergarten superintendent for 26 years. Right before his death in 1923, Turkey became a republic proclaimed by the Turkish Grand National Assembly under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The Allies began to evacuate the following day from all places in Turkey. The last piece I have for you today are my own words, but inspired by these two memories of Alice. In chapter 1, she remembers her father saying, "What matters is that we complete these unfortunate days without the loss of soul and trust that God is merciful. We, Armenians, are used to beginning from scratch." Mrs. Persape, her orphanage director, "Finally, it seems that the tolls of 20 church bells have awakened the human conscience that has been asleep for eternity." I dream of a day when every child has a spring. And that begins with me. And that begins with me. For those of you who are here tonight and chose to partake in a very difficult experience with me, I am gifting each of you an Armenian flag. This flag, designed by Stepan Malkansians in 1990, has 3 horizontal bands: red, blue, and orange. Red for the struggle of the Armenian people, blue for the desire of Armenians to live in peace, and orange for the diligence of the Armenian people. I ask that if you take one, you keep it in a safe place and you look upon it with a remembrance and acknowledgement of what we cultivated here tonight. Not because of the 4 years I spent on this evening, but rather because of the courage of my great-grandmother and many like her who refused to let the Armenian people die. When you look upon this flag, ask yourself what kind of world you are perpetuating. More importantly, remember how tonight we denied the denial, and be encouraged that we can choose to do this each and every day by being a voice for those who do not have one. I dream of a day when every child will have a spring, and that begins with me, you, us, together. We have just enough time for me to show you something that was just sent to me this morning. And the past 4 years, I've been getting to know my great-grandmother through words on a page. All I knew is that she held me as a baby. I didn't have that moment saved, and now today I'd like us to watch this together.
It's heavy, Mama. Yes, Mommy. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight. exactly an hour, but I just would like to read this list of thank yous because it took a village to make this happen over 4 years. I need to thank Professor Long, who agreed to be my project advisor for this. Thank you. I cherish every moment I've had to make music with you. You are one of the best musicians I know, and I really appreciate our time together. I need to thank Dr. Bellina, who made this project take flight. There were a couple moments there I didn't know what I was doing, and she was right there to encourage me, and just, oh, I'm so excited to be connected to these people for my whole life. Keen Southard, a PhD student in composition, my family, my mother for speaking tonight, my extended family, graciously allowing me to tell this story that we all share. We share the same source material. The MUA committee, Professor Shea, Professor Opelak, Professor Friedis, Professor Steingrover, Professor Vandermark, Neen-Hain, Maria Newman, who encouraged me to really take the dive into writing my own music my sophomore year. The Institute for Music Leadership and the Susan B. Anthony Institute, the Friends of the Eastman Opera, we wouldn't be here without you, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial and the Chappelle Center, Kevork Murad, Dr. Michael Hagopian, who interviewed my great-grandmother. That's why we were able to hear her voice at the beginning of this lecture. He's no longer with us, but it's the reason that the stories continue. And the Armenian creatives, my new friends that I just met in New York City this weekend, and many of whom are watching tonight. Again, thank you all. This is what life is about. So thank you for being here with me. I love you all. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.